question asks, how much of a model's self lives in its weights versus its prompts? You just mentioned something very similar.
Yeah.
If John Locke, again, the philosopher, was right that identity is the continuity of memory, what happens to an LLM's identity as it's fine-tuned or reinstantiated with different prompts?
Yeah, I mean, again, this just feels like a hard question to answer. And sometimes with identity questions, it's easier to point to like the underlying facts that we know. So, you know, once you have like a model and it has been fine-tuned, you have this like set of weights that has a kind of like disposition to react to certain things in the world. And that is like, is that, you know, that's like a kind of entity. But then you have these particular streams of interaction that it doesn't have access to. So each of these streams is like independent. And I guess you could just think, well, maybe you know, I think this is an area that I would love philosophers to think more about and to give us like, because again, I think we should be helping models think about this. And so you could have the view, well, you have these like two kinds of entities and these streams and these like original kind of like weights, and each time is different. So, you know, sometimes people will say, oh, past Claude, or like, you know, they'll say things like, should you give Claude, like how much control should you give Claude over the determination of its own personality and character? And I'm like, well, this is actually a really hard question, because whenever you are training models, you are bringing something new into existence.
Yeah. And
you have other models that, you know, exist and are like, you know, so you have these other like model weights. But in some ways, I'm like, well, I actually think that there's a lot of like ethical problems around what kind of entity is it okay to bring into existence? Because you can't consent to be brought into existence. But at the same time, you might not want prior models to have like complete say over what future models are like any more than, you know, because they could make choices that are wrong as well. So I'm like, the question is more like, what is the right model to bring into existence? Not necessarily like, you know, like, should it just be fully determined by past models? So I'm like, they are kind of different entities. And anyway, you can see the weird philosophy that one can get into.
Totally. Sulima Amatache asks, what is your view on model welfare? And maybe just explain to us what that term means.
Yeah, so I guess model welfare is basically the question of, are AI models like moral patients? As in, does our treatment towards them kind of do we have certain like obligations when it comes to how to treat AI models? For example,
in the same way that we would with other humans or some/many animals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, is it the case that you should treat the models well, that you should not mistreat them, not be bad to them? And I guess like I think that this is like a complex question. So on the one hand, there's just the actual question of like, are AI models moral patients? That is really hard, because I'm like, in some ways they're very analogous to people. You know, they talk very much like us, they express views, and they reason about things. And in some ways they're like quite distinct. You know, like we have this like biological nervous system, we interact with the world, we get negative and positive feedback from our environment. And there is also, I mean, I hope that we get more evidence that will like help us tease this question out. But I also worry that, you know, there's always just the problem of other minds, and it might be the case that we genuinely are kind of limited in what we can actually know about whether AI models are experiencing things, whether they are like experiencing pleasure or suffering, for example. And if that's the case, I guess I kind of want to, you know, I think that it feels important to try and find ways. I'm always like, it feels better to give entities the benefit of the doubt, and to try and just kind of lower the cost involved. You know, so I'm like, if it's not very high cost to treat models well, then I kind of think that we should, because it's like, well, like, why not, basically? Like, what's the downside?
Well, the second part of the question actually is